Welcome to Clackamas County Planning Commission meeting, April 8th. This is to discuss ZDO 288. I call to order the Planning Commission meeting for April 8th, 2024. Darcy, will you please call the roll call?
Commissioner Pack.
Here.
Commissioner Wilson.
Present.
Commissioner Peterson.
Present.
Commissioner Middaugh. Commissioner Middaugh, you're on mute.
Tom, too.
We'll come back around. Commissioner Lopes.
Here.
I'm here.
I didn't know there was another Lopes here.
Commissioner Murphy.
Present.
Commissioner Stevens.
Give me 1 second, Jim.
And Commissioner Moss has indicated that he will arrive late.
Thank you. Public comments.
Hearing here.
Yeah, I just say I'm in the meeting and give me a chance to get the headphones on.
Please don't bitch on me. You're
Tom, you're not.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm here. I apologize. I'll mute.
Okay, so Chair Murphy, do you want to read the section on public comment?
Yes, public comments, please, Dylan.
No, you go ahead and read the script part first, and then he'll just ask.
Okay. This is opportunity for attendees to provide comment on an issue of concern to the Planning Commission, unless that item is on the agenda for public hearing. The public hearing on file ZDO 288 relates to utility facilities, including the potential impact of PGE's proposed Stafford area transmission line. Will include an opportunity for public testimony, which will be announced later in the agenda. If there is anyone in attendance who would like to provide comment or something other than utility facility or Stafford area transmission line, please use the raise hand feature now. Dylan, do we have any hands raised?
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Again, if anyone online would like to provide comment on something other than the utility facilities or the Stafford area transmission line, please go ahead and hit your raise hand feature now. Seeing none, Chair.
Great, thank you. This public hearing is now open for the consideration of ZDO 288, a legislative proposal to amend the Clackamas County zoning and development ordinance and potentially the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan. Assisting us in the hearing today are several members of the county staff. Principal Planner Joy Fields, Planning Director Jennifer Hughes, Administrative Specialist Darcy Renhart, Senior Community Relations Specialist Dylan Bayloff. The public hearing is being conducted virtually using the Zoom platform. Panelists for today's hearing, which include members of the Planning Commission, county staff, and both audio and video capability. If the panelist is participating with audio but not video, members of the audience will not see that panelist's name on their screen, but will be able to hear them when they speak. Audience members who have joined the meeting will have their mics muted unless they wish to testify, in which case they will be called upon to do so by county staff moderator. Audience members' video will not be turned on at any time. Today's hearing is being recorded as required by law. The county will make every effort to post the recording on the county website as soon as possible. The Planning Commission is charged with making a recommendation on the legislative amendment proposal to the Board of County Commissioners. The record from this hearing will be forwarded to the board, which will make the final decision on this matter. The board will conduct another hearing on this application on June 12th, 2024 at 10 a.m. That hearing will be de novo, meaning that the hearing will be started anew and additional testimony may be offered. Tonight's hearing will not go beyond 10 p.m. unless majority of the Planning Commission commissioners in attendance vote to continue past that time. If not concluded, it will be continued to date and time certain. A hearing may be continued for other reasons as well. If an announcement of an additional hearing date and time is made tonight, it will be the only notice given of an additional hearing. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. Planning and zoning staff report, enter into the record any additional correspondence received, testimony by representatives of recognized community planning organizations or hamlets, testimony by any other person, closing of the public hearing, Planning Commission discussion and action. The Planning Commission staff will now present the staff report.
Perfect. So Joy and I are going to give this report together. I'm Jennifer Hughes. I'm the County Planning Director. And I'll start and provide kind of an overview and some background, and then I'm going to turn it over to Joy to provide some details about the proposal and present the staff recommendation. So for starters, just kind of at its highest level, what are we proposing to do? We are proposing to amend the zoning and development ordinance to do three key things. Adopt a more comprehensive definition of utility facility, clarify the types of utility lines that must be underground, and allow the following outright: utility facilities inside the right-of-way and utility lines outside the right-of-way. And we'll talk about that in more detail shortly. I do want to note the Planning Commission has already heard some public comment at a prior meeting about a particular utility facility that PGE is proposing in the Stafford area. I would anticipate you may get some testimony about that tonight, perhaps not, but there was certainly public comment at your last meeting, and there has definitely been some interest about this. And so I want to clarify that what you are doing tonight is not making a decision or a recommendation on any specific utility project. What we are looking at is actually amending the county's zoning code. Having said that, there are implications on this particular PGE project, in terms of what you do with the code amendments. That will shape potentially the approval process that PGE or any other utility provider would have to go through to develop a new facility. But again, there's no specific decision being made. There's no application before you regarding any particular utility facility. So how did we get here? Why are we doing this, and why are we doing this now? Historically, utility facilities inside county road rights-of-way have proceeded through a utility permit. That's something that's required by the county when a utility provider is going to locate infrastructure in the county right-of-way. It is not something that gets reviewed or analyzed by planning and zoning. So most of these proposals, a number of utility lines, of course, go in county rights-of-way, and that process has really bypassed planning for certainly as long as I've been at the county, which is now 3 decades, and I think probably for longer than that. Outside rights-of-way, it's a little bit more of a gray area. There certainly are utility facilities that the county has reviewed through conditional use permits or non-conforming use alterations for things like water reservoirs, substations, sewer pump stations, filtration facilities, those kinds of things would routinely have land use review. Utility lines, I think, typically haven't really been on our radar. A lot of them are accessory uses. So somebody is, developing a particular use and running service lines for that particular use. Those are treated as accessory uses. Somebody's building a subdivision. They build utilities to serve that subdivision. It's part of the subdivision approval. But we really don't have much history with doing a sort of separate land use review for utility lines. Of course, a number of them are non-conforming uses. They've been out there for, for decades, and maybe they've had some modifications to them. But in terms of permitting new utility lines, I'm really not aware that we've been doing that. We are aware that, and have been aware that state law has some requirements related to utility lines outside rights of way where land use review is required. And we've had those conversations with applicants and discussed what would be required if they chose to go that route. But again, that's only in farm and forest zones that are regulated by state law. So how did we all of a sudden have this kind of revelation? Well, we had a question from an attorney, and county council did some analysis of the county zoning code and concluded that, in fact, your code says, our code says, utility facilities require a conditional use permit in many zones. And the definition of facility, when looked at strictly, covers not just things like water reservoirs and pump stations, but utility lines as well. And the other avenue that was researched is whether, because the county is required to allow utility lines in county rights of way, does that mean that we're required to allow it under land use? And the conclusion was no. So we determined based upon that utility lines require land use review in most zones. Tonight's proposal does not involve any changes to the exclusive farm use, timber, or ag forest zones. Those zones are regulated heavily by state law. State law already allows utility lines inside rights of way and has specific regulations and processes that apply outside rights of way. No changes are proposed to that. We are proposing to adopt a more complete definition of utility facility. Currently, our definition of public utility facility is narrow, too narrow, and we've known that for a long time. That's been one of those things that's been on the cleanup list for a while. And again, Joy will talk about this in a little more detail in a minute. The scope of our code's requirement for underground utilities is unclear. I think the best argument is that we require underground utilities, except when prohibited by the utility provider, for utility service lines. When you are in the context of doing a development for an apartment building, a house, an office complex, a church, a school, the utilities that serve that use are required to be underground unless the utility provider prohibits it. But there's a little bit of gray area in our code such that I think it's important that we clarify that. Is that what we mean, or are we saying that other types of utility facilities, more like distribution or transmission lines, larger scale utilities, must be underground? Background. So the Board of County Commissioners, prior meetings, I guess I should say, the Board of County Commissioners held a policy session last November to talk about these issues. At that policy session, they initiated this set of code amendments. The proposal that you have before you tonight is consistent with the proposal that the board initiated. I do want to be clear, though, both for the Planning Commission and for the audience, that the board was clear that they were proposing kind of the most expansive proposal that they were going to consider adopting, and that they recognized that testimony and recommendation from the public or the Planning Commission could change the scope of what's ultimately adopted. So just, I guess, by way of context, that is what the board's discussion was. Then the Planning Commission held a study session in February where we talked to you about what was going to be coming before you tonight, and gave you an opportunity to ask questions and learn more about the issue. One, I guess, thing I want to kind of address as well is, so, you know, why is this important to do this? We could just require land use approval for these things. Why is there this sort of sense of urgency to amend the code when it's apparently been this way for decades? And of course, as I mentioned, it's been this way for decades, but it hasn't been administered that way. Our understanding of what the word said was different than it is now. The reason there's an administrative urgency to this is that in 2022, and I keep meaning to pull the numbers for 2023, and I haven't yet, there were nearly 2,000 utility permits filed with Clackamas County. A number of those are very minor. I have not tried to analyze exactly how many would be considered minor, but that's a lot of permits. It's a lot of permits for planning staff to even look at, much less begin to try to process. It's potentially burdensome for utilities. That may not be, you know, sort of the overriding public concern necessarily, but it is. And a number of the permits that we're seeing, because now I've started seeing some of these, not all 2,000, but the engineering department is bringing certain ones to our attention now based on some thresholds that we've set. And there are a lot of permits for things like, I'm going to take an existing power pole that's 40 feet tall and replace it with one that's 50 feet tall. I'm going to take a wood pole and replace it with a metal pole. There's discussion, PGE is going to be pursuing some wildfire mitigation projects where they're talking about, changing existing facilities to make them safer in terms of fire hazard. We had somebody talking about extending a broadband connection on existing poles. So, there are a lot of things that are going on out there that are possibly most people in the community would agree don't merit a conditional use permit. And that's the sort of thing that, I'm just encouraging the commission to keep in mind, that, you may decide to recommend something less robust than what we've, asked for tonight, but nonetheless, there are a number of permits that we're reviewing all the time that might not merit full land use review. And so with that, that's kind of the background on how we got here. And Joy will take over now to talk a little bit about the details of the proposal.
As Jennifer mentioned, one of the components of the proposal is to clarify what a utility facility is. A lot of times when you think of utilities, it includes broadband. It includes the pipes that take the stormwater that flows off of your roof during a rainstorm. It includes sewer lines. It includes things that we rely on a daily basis that aren't currently covered in our definition of a public utility facility. And I say public because that is the way it is defined in our code currently, as a public utility facility. However, if it serves 20 homes as a utility, would it still be a public utility facility? By removing the public piece, this definition would include that. By amending the utility facility definition to include sewer, to include stormwater, to include fiber optics and telephone, we are clearly identifying uses that most people would agree are public facilities that provide utilities to homes throughout Clackamas County. In addition to amending the definition of a utility facility, we wanted to provide clear definitions of what a utility line is, as well as a utility service line. As Jennifer mentioned, in our code, utility service lines are those lines from the main line to a home. And it is clear that those need to be underground, but it's not actually written that way. It's clear from planning interpretation. And so we wanted to make sure that the utility service line was defined as well as utility line. You will notice there were also minor housekeeping amendments, changing Roman numerals to numbers. And so those are the those are the amendments proposed in section 202. In ZDO section 1006, we wanted to clarify that it is the utility service lines that must be underground unless prohibited by the utility district or company. Applying the underground standard to major utility lines rather than just on a site service line could significantly increase the cost. And there is also that language in the current zoning criteria that says unless prohibited by the utility district. Most of those larger utility lines are lines that are owned, managed, and provided by the utility district. So could they prohibit it themselves? So there's some nuance and gray area to this sentence in 1006 that staff are hoping to clarify. We are also proposing to amend some of the comprehensive plan policies related to underground utilities. And you saw that in the staff report.
So Joy, I'm just going to interrupt quickly here. The plan amendment part is new. The staff report, I spoke about this in the findings, about the existing comp plan policies, which I think, I do think the argument can be made that the existing comp plan policies are consistent with the change we want to make to the zoning code. But I think that if the county does proceed with amending the zoning code as suggested, it would be more consistent if we made some amendments to those comp plan policies to specify that we're talking about service lines and not all lines that have to be underground. And so I don't know that we need to re-notify for that technically, but I think what we would do is just go ahead and send the state a revised notice that shows some edits to the comp plan policies, if that's the kind of the direction that this proposal ends up going in. But essentially, it just means taking those policies that are addressed in the staff report and clarifying that the undergrounding requirements are for service lines. And if the commission decides that you want to do something different regarding undergrounding, we can talk about that when you get to your recommendation stage about what that might look like in terms of a comp plan amendment. And then staff will follow up with the appropriate notification. We've got over 2 months before the board hearing, so there's plenty of time for us to, to meet any technical notification requirements that we might have.
Thank you for adding that additional detail, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
Additionally, through the sections of the code that apply to residential development, commercial development, and other zoning sections, except for those natural resource zones such as ag, forest, timber, and exclusive farm use, we wanted to clarify how utility facilities would be reviewed. And going based on the recommendation from the board, we modified the use tables in the zoning sections, the underlying zoning zones, as well as a couple of the overlay zones, to allow outright all utility facilities in the road rights of way and all utility lines outside the road rights of way. Again, utility facilities along the rights of way are those water, sewer, stormwater, broadband, those facilities that can be contained within the road right of way. If you think of a large pump station or a large transmission facility, they're not going to fit in the road right of way. So allowing outright all utility facilities in the road right of way are going to be allowing those the smaller facilities and the linear facilities. Allowing utility lines addresses that issue with how utility lines transport these utilities that we rely on, and they are linear in nature. And so allowing them outside the right of way, both above ground and below ground, would be a primary use based on the direction we received from the Board of County Commissioners. The proposed zoning amendments do keep the non-linear utility facilities that are out of the right of way, such as sewer pump stations, electrical substations, and water reservoirs, as conditional uses. And it adds non-linear facilities in some of the smaller lot-sized residential zones as a conditional use. In those sections of the code where these proposed amendments are, you'll also notice some housekeeping where different types of utilities are grouped together. You may remember recent code amendments related to housing, where all dwelling types are combined in one area of the use table to make it easier for people to review them. That is what we're proposing in these zoning amendments as well. So you'll see some uses that were scattered throughout the table, all condensed under the utility section of the code. You'll also see that with that moving of items from above utilities to being included in utilities, the footnote numbers have changed. And so those are tracked through the table as well. So with those proposed amendments, staff recommends approval of ZDO 288 as proposed in attachment A, as well as amendments to the comprehensive plan to distinguish between requiring or advocating for underground utility lines based on the type of the line. And with that, I conclude my part of the staff report. Jennifer, do you have anything you want to add?
I don't think so at this point. I think we can take questions from the commission.
Thank you for the report. Are there any questions from the commission? Any hands? I have one. I'm just offhand, something that caught interest was you were talking about stormwater. Well, what kind of catches me on this is outfall pipes coming from a wastewater facility that may have to go miles sometimes to its destination. Or it may be just a mile down the road, but it may be crossing private land. It may be crossing developed land, and it may be above ground or it may be below ground. We're not sure how it's going to be run. So what kind of facility would we be calling this utility?
I think that would be a linear utility facility or a utility line. So under the current proposal, it would be outright allowed. I mean, currently under our code, that would require land use review. And that's one of the challenges, of course, as you mentioned, these things that potentially go miles create some interesting challenges for notice and, kind of managing that public aspect of the project, because, we're not used to having land uses that go, for miles and miles. So it's an interesting logistical knot to try to unravel.
Okay. Yeah, so something to consider else. Carrie back, Commissioner Pack.
Thank you for bringing that question, Chair. Reminded me also of stormwater when you just mentioned. So it's not just the stormwater lines, but what about the above ground green infrastructure treatment facilities? So those are, they're not like pump station where there's a building, but they're certainly above ground and they're most likely off of the right of way. So would they be considered to be ones that would require conditional use permit according to this definition?
Joy, do you want to take that one?
I will try, sure. So stormwater treatment comes in a variety of, it could be a wetland, it could be a pond, it could be a bioswale. A lot of that development is going to be reviewed during the development of the subdivision that is being served by that stormwater facility. As I was talking with a utility provider, if you build a little hill and you put grass on it in your yard, like a bioswale or a grass yard, we may not see that. But if you are building a large project that involves grading and removing loads of dirt, we would see that, especially if it's within our habitat overlays, like habitat conservation area or river stream or floodplain, which are those low areas that are often where stormwater conveyance and treatment takes place. So there's, even with the current definition, there are touch points where planning review would come in, whether it's the development of the house or the development of the subdivision or the review of the of the overlay zone. So even with these changes that are occurring, we would still see it. Your point of the fact that they may not be in the right of way. Most of the treatment facilities have stormwater right of way.
Well, sometimes they're an easement, but sometimes they aren't. And sometimes they're underground. You know, I mean, a lot of the it's underground outside of the right of way. I can think of highways with treatment facilities that happen outside of the right of way before it goes into the receiving stream. So I think, I don't know why I didn't think about it before, Chair. You're brilliant. You thought about the stormwater issue, but I do think that stormwater is a little bit it doesn't quite fit into the definition that we have identified so far. So that might be something that we might want to think about a little bit.
I think if I could just kind of echo sort of what you're saying and piggyback a little bit on what Joy was saying. We did have that question raised about, and Joy had some conversations with some utility providers who've had interest in this package. And that was kind of one of the questions I think I saw in an email from one of them was, well, what if we're using kind of a natural drainage way, right? Does that now become a utility facility based upon this? And, you know, I think we might want to look at adding some clarity and would certainly welcome your thoughts on how we do that. I mean, the definition of utility facilities says, you know, a constructed portion. So if it were truly a natural drainage way, but how much is like that today, right? That you're not going to be getting into this argument that something's been changed in some way. So I think that's a good point. And I think it kind of adds to this question of like, well, okay, so if somebody's doing, you know, some sort of on-site detention facility, does that really require some kind of separate like land use conditional use permit? Well, no, I think we would treat that as an accessory use, but some clarity I think would be.
Yeah, and I do think that the planning and land use, I mean, the whole, the process behind which you do to take into account for planning review and land use review associated with these facilities, I guess I'm just concerned that if each of them has to have conditional use permit, that all of a sudden brings it up to a different sort of administrative, ongoing administrative burden to the utilities that they don't necessarily have to deal with at this point. So, okay, I'll think about it some more. Thank you.
Chair, you're on mute.
Tom 1, Commissioner Peterson.
I think Michael was ahead of me.
Oh, Michael's ahead.
Yeah.
Commissioner
Okay.
Wilson, please.
Hi, I have two questions really. The first one is, what is the purpose of a conditional use permit? Why do we even have those? And just want to be clarified on that. And the second question that I have is, I noticed in the discussion we had, or the presentation on page 6, it talked about utility prohibiting, you know, underground or how to use the facility. What's the criteria for those prohibitations? What do they say? I can't put it underground and I have to have it above ground? what are those criteria? And if it's the company that's doing it, they could elect to do it just to save money and not to provide a better facility. Okay.
Those are great questions. So I'm going to take the first one about what is a conditional use permit? Why do we do that? And I'm sure that there's some like planning definition somewhere that would tell you, but I'm gonna paraphrase or tell you kind of what I think. We use conditional use permits when we think that a particular use might be appropriate in a particular location, but might not. So you could say, for instance, that, I don't know, schools are a conditional use permit in rural residential zones, but we don't necessarily think that every single legal lot in a rural residential zone would be appropriate for a school. Whereas we have deemed that every lot in a rural residential zone, as long as it's not in the floodway, is appropriate for a house. But we don't necessarily think they might also, maybe it's too small, the shape's weird, it doesn't have good transportation access, the neighbors are too close, there could be all environmental constraints, reasons why a school would be a bad idea. So that's one reason. It's not appropriate everywhere. And secondly would be because we think that we want to be able to apply some kind of, I'll call them special conditions to whatever that use is. So I'm going to use the school example again. You might decide that a school would work on this particular lot, but it's only going to work if they shrink the size and pull it away from the property line and build a hedge and don't have their athletic fields lit after 9 p.m. So you can apply those types of conditions where you think it's necessary to kind of mitigate the impacts of that use on neighbors. I think those are the two reasons. The other thing that a conditional use permit does is it provides an automatic public hearing. So generally for most land use applications, if they require, what we call a type 2 review, neighbors get notice, but the decision is by the staff. And if you want a public hearing, you have to file an appeal if you don't like the decision. Whereas with a conditional use permit, it automatically goes to our hearings officer. And so the public automatically has the right to come to a hearing. So that's what a conditional use permit is. And I do think actually, I had actually made some notes that I didn't say in the background section, but that is something to keep in mind with these utility facilities. And I think it's a reason why things like reservoirs and, substations and sewer pump stations, that might make sense to have a conditional use permit. Whereas sort of like underground utility lines are everywhere. And is there really a place where you would say, nope, you can't have that here? They would still have to meet environmental regulations, but because of the need to have sort of interconnected utility systems, it becomes difficult to start saying, well, you can't have it here, but go put it in that person's neighborhood instead. It's like, well, okay, why is that better? And that's where my brain starts to go. And I'm not saying there isn't ever some analysis about a better location for a particular type of utility facility, but I do think for a lot of utility lines, that may not be, the kind of analysis that we would really be doing. The prohibition question, I don't actually know. That's a good question. The first part of sort of what criteria, let's take the first part of your question, which is, let's suppose I'm building a house and I go to PGE and say, hey, I need electrical service, because normally that's what the overhead service is probably going to be that I'd be looking at. And they tell me you can't have underground. It has to be overhead. I don't know what criteria they would use for that. We could certainly find that out. Most, I think, do go underground, but these days, but overhead, I don't know what the criteria are. And we would just take the utility provider's word for it. Somebody would apply for a building permit, it'd be for a house, we'd say it's got to be underground. They would bring us a letter from, say, PGE saying, we don't allow that in this location, it's prohibited, and that would be kind of the end of the story. But your other point is really kind of one of the ones that staff has been noodling over, which is this, okay, well, if it's a transmission line or a distribution line, and it actually is a facility that PGE, for example, is developing, can they just say it's prohibited? Is that really the standard, or is the standard something more substantial? Like they would have to point to rules that exist, whether it's from the PUC or safety standards or something that would say that. I don't know the answer to that. And as I said, I really think the zoning code is intended not to apply to those kinds of lines, not meaning that they're, that underground's a bad idea. But I don't know how that would really play out. And that's one of the reasons why we think the code should be clarified one way or the other. Our recommendation is to say service lines have to be underground, but the commission could go in a different direction, of course.
Well, I agree with that. I believe it should be underground. We've had too many issues come up with fires getting started because of the overhead utilities. We've had, when they're putting in a new development, most of the stuff's going underground. I mean, they got the utilities, the sewer lines, the water lines, and they ought to put the, electrical lines underground as well. It just amazes me that we haven't done that. I mean, I live in an area where we got a lot of trees. One of those utility lines goes down, we got some problems with fire out here. So I'm advocating that we put them all underground wherever possible, and we don't allow the utility company to say it's prohibited unless they've got some exact criteria for doing that.
Could I butt in here for a second? Michael, on the back of a conditional use permit, there's facts, and it asks the questions. What is a conditional use permit? What is the permit application process? What is needed, whatever, from the county to complete this? So it does give you a briefing of what that permit is for. And number two, you just nailed it. I mean, why is it prohibited? Well, doing a little research on that, when lines get over a certain voltage, they need to be cooled. They get too hot. So it's convenient to have them in the air. Putting them underground, from what I had read, when they're high voltage like that, because they have to put them underground in hurricane countries, in many cases, they have to have like a wet bath around these power lines with a sheathing that keeps them covered, and then they go underground. So yeah, I can see it is a little more expensive, but let's start thinking about our communities 25 years from now. Are we going to be replacing these and putting them underground? Why can't we do it now? I don't know. Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, I think you were getting into deliberations there, if I might make a comment. My question has to do with, and this is directly related to probably what we're going to hear testimony on. If I understand the way the current code is being proposed, anything that's in the right of way, regardless of its scale or, I'm thinking of, putting in a transmission line versus a distribution line. That's a big deal. Now, I don't know the specifics, but it begs the question, this would more or less imply whatever the utility wants to build within a right of way, they can build without any, it would be an outright use without any input from the public or anything like that. Is that how we would interpret this?
Yes, that's correct. Now, there are still standards in terms of the county's authority, in terms of what it allows in its right of way, but it's not from the standpoint of public outreach. It's more from the standpoint of conflicts with the road itself, or, traffic safety and that kind of thing. So I think, as Joy alluded to, there's a limit to what's going to fit in a right of way. I don't think you're going to see something like a reservoir, but there might be some little ancillary things that are not just the utility line, but some kind of other small stuff that might fit if there was, adequate extra room in the right of way.
Okay. Well, this one's a kind of a tricky one. I'm guessing you wrestled with this whole question as well. Is okay. Certainly there are some projects where, yeah, probably ought to have a conditional use, but how do you differentiate what should and what shouldn't? And I think that's the dilemma that you're faced with right now. So
yes,
it's a tough one.
Jennifer, you muted yourself just like 5 seconds into it. Sorry.
I was saying, I think that's the dilemma that the Planning Commission is faced with tonight. But yes, it's the dilemma that Joy and I have been wrestling with. Yes.
Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you, Chair Murph. I think it's exactly the same question, but I want to come at it a little differently because this is what I'm wrestling with, which was really what Jennifer said about 45 minutes ago. I always ask myself, just because we can, should we? So if it's come to light that we should have been doing this in the ordinances of the comp plan, but we haven't for whatever reason, if the county had the staff and the money, would we be doing this? Would we, whether it's inside or outside or above or below? And so it really makes me go right to the bare question of what should we be doing? Where should citizens be involved in permits? Where should people have a voice? Where is this really automatic and part of the process, and where is it not? And I know you guys have been living this for months now, but I can't seem to separate that in my head because, I don't think it's by accident that this was in the ordinances and the comp plan, whether it was managed that way or not. But I really have to ask why, and then really what should be. If this wasn't a resource issue, what should we be doing? Don't know if you can answer that, but that's where my head is.
I don't know if I can answer it. I guess I can say, I guess my speculation has been a little different than yours. I think, and again, how will we ever know? I mean, the code's been structured this way for 60 years. Really, I think our definition of public utility facility is from like 1962 or something. It's been around a long time. I think they probably didn't actually think that a utility line was a facility. I mean, I think it was intended to deal with these larger scale type of site specific utility related things. And that's the reason that we never, for 60 years, were requiring conditional use permits to run a sewer line or a, power line or a telephone line or whatever. That's what I think, but I can't prove it. And, we're not going to find any background that tells us. And I guess the other question, the question of like, what should we be doing? I don't know. I mean, do we have the staff right now to review 2,000 utility permits? No. Could the county staff up for that? Sure. Could we charge, fees enough to, I mean, that's what would have to happen, right? It would be, obviously, we'd need more hearings officers probably to run that many. So it starts to become a question of, what you said though about when should the public be involved? And I think that, that's really the question. If we're going to run a sewer line down, I don't know, Oak Grove Boulevard because they need a new one, or it needs to be bigger, or it needs to be, does that really warrant a conditional use permit? I mean, that's the question. But not all utility lines are the same. And I think that is the charge. It's to think about what are the impacts. And maybe that's what I would look at instead of sort of what are the impacts that the public would be concerned about that are appropriately addressed through land use. Because some of it's safety standards, like there are safety standards for utilities, is my understanding. They're not applied by the county. There is a public utility commission that rules on some of these. So it's sort of thinking about like, what's the appropriate role of county land use in whatever these impacts might be. And I guess that's the filter maybe that I would put on it.
That helps a lot, Jennifer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Louise.
Yeah, thanks. When we're doing the slideshow, is there any way we could get, like, it's not the very last slide, we just said questions, but I think it was the one before that. Can we get that back up? Because that's, I want to quote it properly. I'd like to see it again. Oh yeah, that's the one. On the second bullet point where it talks about amendments to the comprehensive plan policies to distinguish between requiring or advocating for underground utility lines based on type of line. What would be the criteria between requiring or advocating, and what would advocating mean? Just like I'm for it, but not required. So yeah, can anybody elaborate more on that?
I can. That's a great question, Louise, and it's because I skipped that part when I was talking about the comp plan policies, and I meant to talk about it and I didn't. So from a land use standpoint, I mean, our comp plan has a lot of policies in it that don't relate directly to development review. A lot of policies do, you know, the things that say you can have this type of use in this zone and you can rezone your property under these circumstances and you have to do streetlights and you gotta, you know, there's a lot of policies that do relate to development review. But we have a lot of things in our comp plan that don't. Other things that the county commits itself to do maybe outside of the zoning code process. So that would be an option. If, for instance, the commission ends up finding, you know, I think it's appropriate that we require that individual, you know, utility service lines be underground. But we're not at the point of saying we're going to require that all utility lines be underground. But we think it's a good idea. We think it's something that the community, the utility provider should be moving toward. You could have a different kind of policy statement in the comp plan that would say that. But it wouldn't be something that would hold a developer of a utility to, you know, mandatory undergrounding. So for instance, you know, I cannot give you the details, but I know that the county has been partnering with PGE on the trying to find some funding. I think it was a federal funding source to underground some lines because it is extremely expensive to do that. And so that type of a thing where we would as a county be saying, we think this is a good idea. We think we should be moving toward this. We're going to try to find, and maybe the word won't end up being advocating, but you could have a policy that would sort of commit the county to trying to move that forward, undergrounding existing lines, undergrounding major facilities without actually saying you must do this as part of land use. And so that would be the distinction between where you could potentially go with some policy language, but it's not going to have the same teeth. You know, I mean, it isn't the same as saying it's required. And again, I don't really think the zoning code says it's required now, except for utility service lines, but it's just not clear. Not 100%.
Great. Well, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you, Louise. Vice Chair Pack.
Right, so I have one more question. Kind of going back to your example of putting a sewer line on Oakfield or whatever, as a public utility manager, when we do capital improvement projects, we go through various public outreach of folks that are impacted, whether we are required by land use or not. It's just part of the way that those projects are completed. But as a private for-profit utility, like PGE, cable, Northwest Natural Gas, all of those utilities are necessity within our lives, but they're not really required or have a practice, or, you know, they don't necessarily go through the public outreach process like public utilities do. And one of the things that I found difficult to try to understand was taking the public out of the public utility facilities. We're putting all of the utilities under the same umbrella. And, you know, the public utilities would still do the outreach and public involvement with neighborhoods, whether it's required by land use or not, just because we serve at the pleasure of our customers that are public. But I'm not sure that you could compel private utilities to be under same kind of practices. So that it's just, you know, I don't know, maybe that's an advocacy similar to what the item that we just got through talking about with undergrounding, whether it's a requirement or an advocacy. I do think that, you know, because you can't outline everything for every situation, when you try to generalize all of the definitions, there are some things that we should go to public outreach with. And there are most things that probably doesn't need to be doing that. And I don't know how to kind of carve out what is big enough and what is important enough for all utilities to move forward with outreach before constructing. And I think that's the part that is most difficult for me to try to answer. So
And I will just say your take on public utility, it kind of opens up this, yeah, under what I think of as public, right, is government, or, you know, a special district, or where you've got this, you're responsible to some sort of voters, or you've got a board or whatever, you know. And of course, under our definition of public utility facility currently, it cites to the ORS, specific section of the ORS, which actually doesn't include some utilities that are publicly provided, but does include places like PGE, which is, you know, private. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting conundrum. I think the issue right now with the definition is just that we've got a lot of what we would think of as utility facilities that don't have a clear path in the code. We've had this problem for years, and so we have to kind of go through this. Oh, well, we'll find that a water reservoir is similar to, you know, so that you can actually get a conditional use permit for something that we all know you need. That I think does need to be cleaned up. But your point about the public involvement, I think, is, yeah, then that becomes this question of what's the appropriate land use review.
Thank you. We lost Mr. Murdoch. He cannot maintain a connection. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Moss, Commissioner Moss. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Murphy. So yeah, Jennifer, you just hit on my point about, I think it's more of an advocacy role for us. And by you stating the state statute by that clearly kind of puts that, in my view, in the scope of the state legislature. So I think that's something the Planning Commission could advocate to them. We'd like to see it underground, but I don't think we have the authority, nor do you have the staff to, as you said, enforce any of that. So it needs to come from a higher body. So I think it's the state legislature on that particular point there. As to, you know, regulating it, I think there's good points, and read through the materials on that. So thank you, Joy, and everyone on that. So good points on either side. So I'm waiting to see what else we have tonight before making a decision on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And just one quick point. PGE is a public company, but it has a different meaning. It's on the stock exchange, and it's for profit, and it's definitely for profit, and it has been profitable. I'll stop there. Commissioner Tammy.
I don't remember us covering this in our study session, but what does, say, Washington County do? We usually kind of ask that question. I can't remember the answer, if we did.
My understanding, and I have not read their code, but I reached out to their the person in charge of their current planning department, and was told that they exempt utilities in rights of way from land use review. I don't know. I certainly don't know what the other 34 counties do besides us in Washington, but yeah.
What about outside right of way? Did you bring that up?
They have some exceptions, I believe, for underground lines, but they do still have some things that require a conditional use permit. And he said their code was well overdue for a cleanup also.
Oh, of course.
But they do exempt more than we do currently. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Chair, you are on mute.
Commissioner Pack, you had your hand up for a second.
Oh, Jennifer said what I was going to mention. The Washington County still requires conditional use permits for what I call vertical structures. So pump stations, reservoirs, you know, stuff that people will see as they drive by. But vast majority of the underground utilities are not necessarily, you don't have to go through the permitting. Go through all of the public involvement issues, but not necessarily the conditional use permits.
Thank you. May I ask, is it the power lines themselves, or is it the pole or the tower that's holding them, is a question too. Because power lines are going to be there whether underground or above ground, but is it the tower itself that should be require a conditional use permit?
Well, that's certainly one thing that you can factor in to that question. I would say we probably want to turn to hearing from the public now, and then you can noodle about that a little bit while we're doing that.
Thank you. Okay. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those that are included in our meeting packet?
2 items of written testimony have been received since your packet went out and was posted online. One was testimony in support of the clarification and the proposed amendments that was provided by PGE last Friday and added to the record earlier today. And one was from a resident who provided testimony regarding how the ZDO's ability for protection of property rights should not be altered. And that was provided to us on Sunday and added to the record today.
And I did send those both out by email, but it was like 5 o'clock or so this afternoon, so I don't know that you got to see it. We did establish a deadline for written testimony to be sure that you got it. So, but we did get a couple delayed ones, and they will certainly go to the board if you do end up finishing your work tonight. They're still part of the record, and we'll continue through the process.
Thank you. Dylan from PGA will be taking over here and moderate the testimony portion of the hearing. Take it away, Dylan.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now is the time for public testimony. First, we are going to hear from representatives of community planning organizations known as CPOs or hamlets. For public knowledge, CPOs are part of the Community Involvement Program for Clackamas County. They are advisory to the Board of County Commissioners on land use matters affecting their communities. CPOs are notified of proposed land use actions and legislative changes within their boundaries. They may review these applications and provide recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. And on hamlets, Clackamas County initiated the Hamlet and Village program as an offshoot of the Complete Communities program in 2006. It was in response to grassroots efforts by citizens to become more involved with county government and to help support their community. There are 3 established hamlets in Clackamas County: the hamlet of Beaver Creek, the Malino hamlet, and the Stafford hamlet. All hamlets hold regular monthly meetings. So each of those organizations, if they are here, will have 5 minutes in total to testify, each one. If you are the official representative from a CPO or a hamlet, you can use the raise hand feature now, and that can be found on the top or bottom of your Zoom interface, depending on your device. We will get to everyone else in a moment, but right now, please, only hamlets or CPOs. I do have one hand raised. It is a handle of Randall Yamada. Ms. Randall, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and just to confirm you are, can you please specify which organization you are from?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Are you from CPO or Hamlet?
I'm from a CPO. I'm Randall Yamada, and I'm from the Stafford Tualatin Valley CPO.
Excellent. You have 5 minutes. Go right ahead.
Okay. This is a little bit confused because as you were discussing your the 288, I was making notes, and I have notes all over the place. So in addressing the Planning Commission, and these are comments for the Clackamas County Planning Department on modifications to the ZDO for utility systems. So the zoning ordinance currently requires conditional use processing, and whether or not is something that needs to be resolved by location, type, size, and impact prior to issuing new ZDO modification. And from I think the viewpoint of the people in our area, it's primarily visual and safety. And I think depending on who you talk to, it's visual, or it's some people are really concerned about safety. And there's quite a discussion to be had about both, because there are ordinance impacting the for us impacting the visual quality, and there are conditions out here that also are primarily fire safety, and also if there are downlines, there's exiting their sites and exiting and escaping safely with very large transmission towers that are being planned. And the basic idea of allowing utility lines and structures outside of utility easements, these are the utility lines, the transmission lines, on private property without public notification, review, and appeal rights, goes against the basis of the Oregon's Land Use Comprehensive Plan and development ordinances, whose purpose is to protect the residents and the communities of Clackamas County. And so if you note that under ZDO 288, the definition for utility lines says they may include support poles or towers and ancillary equipment integral to the monitoring or operation of the utility line. So lumping the structures, towers, cables with ground anchors for lateral support, for example, those really should be identified in the category review table as opposed to the definition. And I think you could say that about a lot of the other types of transmission types of, like your pipes and that sort of thing, your water systems, communication systems also. But I think it needs to be, I'm positive that it needs to be separate in order for the public to understand what's happening. Because if it's simply in the definition, who in the world ever reads those definitions anyway?
Randall, you have about 30 seconds left, fair warning.
Okay, thank you. So I think the proposed changes need time for in-depth consideration and modification by the citizens and the community planning organizations before being approved. As this is a new system, essentially, for the planning department. So I would like to ask you to delay the approval of ZDO 288, however you do it, continuance, whatever, to allow time for the CPOs to develop their own proposals and recommendations.
Randall, we've reached time.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Okay, are there any other representatives out there from CPOs or hamlets who would wish to give testimony on this matter? Okay, great. Our thanks again to Mr. Yamada. Appreciate it. Okay, now's the time we will open up comments to any member of the public that wishes to do so. If you want to provide comments, you can utilize the raise hand feature in Zoom. This could be found on the top or bottom of your Zoom interface, depending on your device. If you are on the phone, we don't have anyone on the phone, so that's okay. I will call upon you when it is time for you to provide testimony, and you can please begin by stating your name and your general area of residence. Please note that public testimony is limited to 3 minutes in total for each person. I may hold my phone up, as you've seen me do, to let you know around how much time you have left at some points. I will also give you a 15-second warning to wrap things up, but please know at the 3-minute mark, I will go ahead and step in to end the time. This is to make sure we get through as many people as possible, so please get through it. There will not be a second opportunity tonight for the same person to provide additional comments. You cannot yield your time to someone else. 3 minutes is the limit. Please do not raise your hand again if you already have gone. So, hands up if you wish to go ahead and testify. Okay. Meredith Armstrong, comma PGE, assuming from PGE. Meredith, you can go ahead and there you go. You are on for 3 minutes with the commission. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you for hearing the amendment request. PGE is definitely in support of this. One, I just wanted to address that it is other jurisdictions do handle it similarly as it's requested to allow in outright and right of way. And just to have that continual efficiency to allow us to keep our network moving and get what we need to the communities that need it. It is a really crucial item. And so we encourage the staff and county to really consider those needs, the efficiency for it, and know that we take safety standards very seriously and want to make sure that whatever we're doing in the safest way possible. I also did want to mention that we also have our outside counsel here who will be speaking on our behalf as well.
Okay, great. Is that person with you right now, Meredith?
He should be raising his hand on his own.
Oh, okay, very good. I see them. Okay, thanks very much, Meredith.
Thank you.
Okay, the hand I have up now is Will Rasmussen. So if perhaps that's the person Meredith alluded to. Will, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself. Will, I do not have down that you've unmuted yourself. It looks like you are still muted. There we go. Go right ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Dylan. Will Rasmussen from Miller Nash here, Land Use Council, PG's outside counsel on this matter. I want to commend the county for modernizing its land use code regarding utilities. As Jennifer noted, this is an odd function of history that seems to have popped up in Clackamas County. I agree that it was probably not the county's intent to require conditional use approval for all utilities. It causes a number of problems for provision of services to end customers. The staff report has it right in determining that the proposed code change is consistent with the planning goals and approval criteria. And in fact, I would say that the zoning and development ordinance is arguably not in compliance with the comprehensive plan and statewide planning goals if it did in fact require CUP review of the thousands of utility permits that come through the county each year. So this is a very helpful, functional fix for the county code. Several capital projects going through the county require this amendment to move utility poles to enable road expansions and other infrastructure improvements, and this is just a necessity. A couple of commissioners raised the prospect of undergrounding electrical lines. That generally works for a number of electrical lines, but because of the amount of electricity caused by larger transmission lines, once you get above a certain voltage, that has an exponential cost on the project. I believe it was Commissioner Murphy noted the heat associated with it. There's several problems associated with undergrounding large transmission lines. I will see if we can develop some quality information for the county to consider that documents what we're talking about. My understanding is that we're not talking about increasing the cost of a project 10% or 20%. It's increasing a project many-fold. So if you have a $10 million project, some of them could become $50 million, $100 million projects. That type of cost doesn't just impact a company's profit line. That impacts ratepayers in a real way, and it impacts the ability to provide needed infrastructure to citizens and businesses in Clackamas County. Another thing I want to note, a few of the public comments that came in by writing were directed towards the Tonquin project. PGE is developing a separate application under the current code for the Tonquin project. And I just wanted to let members of the public know to watch out for that and that they can participate in that public process, which will hopefully be going before long.
15 seconds, Will.
Thank you, Dylan. In conclusion, the subject application solves a significant problem for the county, and we respectfully ask the commissioners to recommend approval of staff's proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Will. Great. Still looking for any hands from anyone else who would like to go ahead and give testimony. Okay, a couple just went up. Next up is Len Shaber. My apologies if that is right or wrong. Sorry, my apologies if that is wrong. Len, if you can go ahead and identify your general area, and then you are on for 3 minutes.
Yeah, this is Len Schaber. I'm Borland Road, just about a quarter mile west of the roundabout, Walker's Corner roundabout. The question at hand, I'll have to agree with Mr. Yamada, is something that's new to the residents of the area. And as far as any resolution or voting should be delayed until we would have a better option to see what's at hand and just how it will affect the residents of the area. I can understand comments as far as the cost of the project, as far as above ground versus below ground, but you need to also take into account the rights of the landowners and people in the area as far as how property rights are affected by the inclusion of large transmission towers or lines in an area that is possibly developable property or things that would be required in that vein. So I'd request delay in any decision until we would have a chance to further identify what's going on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Len. Very good. You can, if anybody else has a hand they would like to raise to give comment, please go ahead and do it now. Okay, great. Next up is going to be RJ Cook. RJ, very good. You've unmuted yourself. You have 3 minutes. If you could just identify yourself and your general area, and you are on with the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Yeah, Rick Cook, Stafford area. Actually, I'm right across from the Stafford Rosemont PGA substation out here. So anyway, thanks for the opportunity to provide you a little different style of testimony in opposition to the proposed amendments of ZDO 288. It's kind of called grapevines versus power lines. May have started with A.R. Shipley over 150 years ago. The Stafford area was a great place for 40 varieties of grapes could grow. Concords were the best, he felt, for juice, jam, and jelly, oh so fine, but never imagined a good place for growing grapes for making wine. I-205 and affordable housing pressure issued flooding land speculators cups. Residents concerned about PGA's ability on how to safely power the region up. Vineyard farms, active agriculture, what our Stafford character is about. Power lines should be underground, not overhead to bail PGE's budget out. Overhead brings baggage with it. Underground is safer but more expensive. Our views, the trees, why we moved here, towers, high tension lines, we're all apprehensive. So now it's time to ponder, is it lines or is it wine that Stafford residents will live with, watching property values decline? If development in the area can bore sewers under Pecan Creek, our expectation, bury lines 6 feet underground, and Stafford's utilities hide and seek. County changing its ZDO because of staffing issue numbers, or finally correcting years of conditional use permitting blunders. Kerosene lamps and wooden stoves could be making a comeback if PGA County and residents can concur on this ZDO attack. Coming soon, how the area will shine. Will it be Pinot Gris or maybe Pinot Noirs? Or will the PGA prevail and win the towers and above ground power line wars? So with that little ditty for you, a little bit different way, trying to keep things a little lighter, and I think it was touched on a couple things. The existent in some of the previous testimony was that it requires conditional use permits. Facilities are critical mechanisms for county engagement and oversight. As stated in the staff report, it's a practical difficulty exists administering the ZDO, and I think Commissioner Stevens touched on it. It's if we had the money and the power, would we be doing all this stuff? So bottom line is fix it. Don't eliminate the procedural issues of planning department funding and staffing challenges, and are the major issues that give me cause for the reason.
15 seconds, Roger.
I'm good to go. Thank you very much. And I appreciate all the hard work everybody does on this.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Cook. All right. Any other hands? They can go ahead and go up. Chair, there's something that's happened that I did not foresee. Mr. Yamada has his hand up again. Now, Mr. Yamada gave testimony, but it was under the CPO. So he has not given testimony in this particular one where we went just to members of the public. Would you like me to allow him to speak for 3 minutes?
Absolutely, Dylan.
Very good. Mr. Yamada, go right ahead and unmute yourself. And just for the record, name yourself and your general area, and you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Randall Yamada, and I'm just speaking for myself. At the board meeting, the Clackamas County, the commissioners meeting, the commission said that ZDO 288 would not impact the Tonkin project. They said it was going to be separate from the Tonkin project. It would be coming later. And in your conversations, the Planning Commission's conversations, it sounded to me like the PGE project was going to be tied to the ZDO 288. The PGE project and ZDO 288 were going to go in together. So what's going on?
I can go ahead and take that, Chair. We were worried we were going to have not enough time to get through testimony so we weren't going to take questions, but I think we're going to be fine. So I'll go ahead and respond to that. I was at the meeting you're referring to, Mr. Yamada, at the board, and I don't remember exactly what was said on that subject. PGE has filed and has already had a pre-application conference with county staff and seems to be considering filing a land use application for the facility that you're talking about. But that doesn't mean that the code amendments, if adopted, wouldn't apply to them. I mean, essentially, this is probably all a matter of timing and however they decide to proceed, and what code amendments actually do or don't get adopted. So it isn't the case that these would not apply to them. It's just they may decide to go through the land use process anyway, or in advance, or not wanting to wait and see if these code amendments actually are adopted. But
well, Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, good. Can you check with Tootie and see or check the recording of the meeting to see what exactly was said? Because there was a specific commitment that they would be separate. Okay.
Sure. I mean, I do know that the gentleman from PGE said that they were going to be filing a land use application. I do recall that, but I can certainly
right, but it would not be impacted by the zoning ordinance modifications.
Okay. Yeah, sure. We can follow up and see what was said.
Thank you.
You bet.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Yamada. Okay, last call. Any other individuals who would like to give comment who have yet to do so? Seeing none, Chair.
Thank you, Dylan. Okay, well, okay, we're at this part, this crossroads right now, whether to continue the hearing or hold the written record open. We have some challenging questions here that we need to answer. So I can move to close this testimony part, which I will. The public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed. Are there any further questions from staff or from our planning commission on this?
I have a question, Murph.
Yes, Tom.
It is a question for the PGE attorney. If you recall, we were going to hold our questions to the presenters, so I would ask that we not close that yet, so we can ask some of the presenters a few questions. If I, okay. Is that okay, Dylan?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Very good. So you would like to bring Mr. Rasmussen back in, and that's fine. I think he's here. Will, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi.
So I have a question about this whole public outreach. We talked a little bit about in our earlier deliberations. If the county had already had this proposed amendments in place, would there be any opportunity for the public to be informed and an opportunity to comment on this project or not?
So if this code amendment as proposed was in place, there would not be a public notice and hearing like a conditional use hearing or non-conforming use expansion hearing that would become before the planning commission or hearings officer. But I believe, and I'd need to check with PGE, that they had to go through a public process with the citing of this through the PUC. But from a land use standpoint, no, we wouldn't be having public land use hearings. It would be treated like any other any other allowed use, like apartment complexes in a residential zone and office buildings in an office zone. A lot of local jurisdictions treat utilities that way. Most local jurisdictions treat utilities that way just because they're necessary. These things are all over the place.
And I understand that. I guess what I'm wrestling with, particular in this project, is for probably 90% of all the utility work. You're right. There's no need to go through this exercise, but there are a few occasions where it may be necessary. And based on what I'm hearing, this kind of falls into one of those categories. And so the concern I have is, how do the property owners and other folks that are notified and have an opportunity to comment that are going to be impacted by this? And one of the advantages of the permitting process is that it provides a mechanism for the public to be engaged and involved in a project like this. So the part that's we're struggling with is, okay, I get it for 90% of the time, but I don't want something that allows a significant project as this one is to go through without some form of public opportunity to make sure their concerns are addressed. And so that's the dilemma for me. And I just wanted to make sure that I understood that. I'm assuming then that the PUC, unless the public is aware of what's going on with the project, there's nothing in the PUC that would require them to make sure that the people that are affected by a project of this nature are notified. Is that a true statement?
I am unfortunately a lowly land use attorney, and I
Okay.
do not know the PUC notice requirements well enough to answer that. And I wouldn't want to guess and tell you something I'm not sure is accurate.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Meredith's hand's up, so maybe she could answer for us. Can we have them both on, Dylan, maybe?
Yes. Meredith, there you go. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so I did want to say that if there are private properties that would be impacted, then, and we needed to file with the PUC for a CPCN to go through that process, then yes, those impacted owners would get notice. They will have opportunity to get heard at that process. And so it is actually a better avenue, I think, because they, understand the particular impacts of utilities, and then also would give the landowners opportunity to be heard.
Can I jump in, Chair Murph?
Go ahead.
Okay. Tom was going right down the same road, but a couple things, and thank you, Meredith, and thank you, Will, very, very much. This is, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, this Stafford project is happening at the same time that we're doing this, but I think this is an incredible example of what if. What if, we had already approved 288 and now this is what would happen, and this is, elevating my concern. So you do some wonderful outreach, Meredith, and people come in and say, I don't want this, and these are the 20 reasons why. I mean, then what? I mean, are they just heard and you do what you want? Or do they, if you're going to do what you want anyway, do they then have to hire an attorney? What would be your next, say, 3 steps once you've heard, a testimony or input?
Well, I will say that with the property owners that we have been able to talk with, to work with, we have done a lot to make sure that their particular impacts were not only heard, but then addressed through what we can do. So if there was a concern of a tree coming out on a property because a pole was going in a certain location, we would take it back. We would look, is there a way that we can shift that pole a little bit to save? We've saved quite a few trees on this project, on the Tonquin project, just by doing some of that and having conversations or finding out, okay, well, what type of plants would you want planted here? We can do that. And working with property owners to lessen the impact to these particular projects. We did hold 2 public houses as well over this project, not because it was a requirement, but because we wanted to give an opportunity for the public to ask questions, to address their issues. There's also, I think, a lot of benefits in upgrading our infrastructure to current safety standards. There's so we certainly do, and I think as a company, we try really hard to work with property owners, to work with neighbors when they will work with us. And that's, we don't want to be in a position where we have to say, that's just it, too bad, we have to do this project. But we have to balance the necessary infrastructure needs with the limited locations we have to work within.
That helps a lot.
Vice Chair Carey.
Well, actually, Mr. Wilson has his hand up first, Chair.
Oh, Mr. Wilson.
Well, thank you, Murph, for ignoring me twice. Yeah. I have a question for Ms. Armstrong. As I mentioned before in the beginning of this, I'm concerned about the criteria that the public utilities, our PGE uses in determining whether or not a line should be underground. I understand from hearing that, there's requirements because of the voltage of the lines that are coming in. But do you have any statistics that you could share with us to say how many of these lines have been prohibited by PGE for whatever reason, whatever your criteria is?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I could certainly get you some numbers. I think for undergrounding like service lines, which is generally where those requirements come into play currently, I think there's usually a reason for the system itself that we can't make it go underground, but we could certainly dig further and get you guys some more numbers on that side of things.
Well, thank you. I would certainly appreciate that. I need to understand this a little better as to what your criteria is to say, okay, we can't put this underground.
Yeah, and so I I did also want to kind of clarify on the undergrounding of transmission, and it was mentioned the immense amount of heat that comes from that. And so one of our struggles beyond the cost is also the immense amount of area that we would need to have the space to bury those transmission lines. So they wouldn't necessarily fit in the right of way. And then we would be looking to impact much larger swaths of private property where nothing could occur on top of that, where that underground transmission line is. Right now with our overhead lines, we, right plant, right tree, we can replant in there. People can still do things in there. If we had to come through and ask for an easement that was for an underground transmission line, there would be nothing, it would be bare earth basically on top of where that easement is. So there's other impacts to, I think, be considered as well when thinking about undergrounding of transmission. It's a much different bag, it's a whole different pot than the undergrounding of distribution.
Well, I certainly understand that, but with the recent storms that we had and the fact that PGE is looking for a rate increase to cover those costs, I would hope that PGE would be looking at something that would, delay any future storms from causing the same issues that we currently have. Keep increasing our rates because you have to repair things that you could possibly, help eliminate by putting some of this underground, and we would, forego any future rate increases or at least make them smaller. Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, and I will say, as far as I think unfortunately that we would see a lot more rate increases if we started undergrounding everything. So that's the unfortunate truth, right?
Vice Chair Carey.
So I had a question to Ms. Armstrong. I think you mentioned that you have had 2 different meetings, and one of the written testimonies that we received from a private property owner also cited those 2 meetings that you had. But they also went on to talk significantly about how they felt like they weren't really being listened to, and that you were being evasive, that it was not something that, and I understand there's always 2 sides to stories, and I'm not taking this as at face value, but I'd like to better understand what, when you do your public outreach, to what extent are those comments taken in terms of changing the design and the impact to the property owners, people that are going to have to live with on a regular basis on these projects that obviously are impactful to them. I understand that you can't talk about, all projects, but this particular project seems to have touched a lot of people's concerns. So I'm hoping you can kind of talk about what outreach you really, can you give an example of one thing that you changed as a result of outreach that you've done?
Yeah, so there was one specific property that we literally have moved the pole location because they were concerned about where it was lining up with their view. So that's one particular example. Another example is, there are actually some property owners who wanted some trees taken out because, you know, and so we worked with them on that, and then worked with the landscape crew to come up with a planting plan specifically for them. I also did hear, we got some feedback on our public open houses that, because we did an open forum where we had different booths set up for different particular pieces of the project, because what we've seen is that everyone had different types of concerns. Some people were really concerned about the wildfires. So we had a station that talked about our wildfire and how we were addressing that in general, kind of across the board with PGE. Some people were really concerned about the trees and the landscape piece of it. So we had our vegetation crew there, we had our foresters there to be able to answer those questions. Some people were really concerned about property values and easements or that type, or impacts to property values. So we had our property team there on that section. We had our engineering team on another section. And so we had sectioned it off to allow for people to kind of just come to us and ask questions and be able to respond. But some people didn't like not having that kind of like just forum to talk to speak right at a panel more type forum. So that was the feedback I kind of heard on our open house and our public outreach. And so we took those in, we looked at different ways. Another thing that we did, because we heard with the poles, we actually we're using a different type of steel so we can make our poles narrower so that they have less visual impact for folks. So we're wherever we can, and there is the option, and it's not you know, going to create a huge cost impact to our ratepayers and just all of those different things. We are open to working with property owners. We do understand that, you know, that this isn't something that they are really excited about, and if someone was coming to one of us, you know, asking these questions, we'd have concerns too. So we certainly do and will continue to throughout this project. Would love to be able to get with property owners who haven't been working with us so far and just kind of continue those conversations.
Well, I would encourage you to reach out to the property owner that provided these comments. If you don't already have that documentation, I'm sure Joy can provide it to you, but this gentleman's not too happy with PGE right now and their outreach. So if anything, it would be really helpful for you to probably take another, you know, pay a little bit more attention to these folks.
Absolutely. We'll take a look at it and follow back up with them if we haven't already.
You're on mute, Chair.
Thank you, Tammy Stevens.
Thank you. And I think we can say the names out loud, can't we, Jennifer? It's part of a public packet. I think what Carrie was going through, which what I was monitoring, was the Susan and Mike Vandenberg comments, because they had a lot, and I think they're legitimate. And one of the things was noise. You hadn't brought that up yet, Meredith. How are you mitigating the noise aspect? And I think that's like when it's rainy or foggy. And then you said that you're addressing property value, but oh my, I mean, what they've stated, whether it's factual or not, that's frightening to lose that kind of value. So can you tell me how that's being addressed, not just that it's being acknowledged?
Yeah, and so for the noise factor, we have determined that the 115 kV lines do not make noise, like that they, to a decibel that anyone would be able to hear, I should say. And so there was a little bit of confusion because Larry did not want to misstate, but we went back and we double checked, and they do not make noise. So that was addressed. And then as far as the property values go, we have had neutral appraisals done on the impacts, and there are appraisers that are certified and do specific appraisals for linear types of projects where you're only really just acquiring a small piece of the property. And with these ones in particular, because we're not like cutting off property, it's really just the very front edge of a property. So that has been, and then the values have definitely ranged from the impacts on the property themselves. And so people who are seeing large vegetation impacts or large tree removal are definitely getting a much higher value than someone who is basically it's just an aerial encroachment potentially, where there's no infrastructure going on their property. We don't have to take out any trees. It's just that there's going to be a little bit of line that's going over on the property. The value of those are much less. And we have gone about, like I said, getting neutral appraisers and just trying to really make sure that that the particular value of the property is addressed, but also further than that, the concerns of how are we going to put their property back to the state it was before the project, and make sure that, they don't have any long-term impacts.
Yeah, there was a mention from someone that about having all these vehicles, not just during the installation, but really on an ongoing maintenance process. Have you addressed that with anyone about like how much encroachment is there on an ongoing basis?
Onto the property? I mean, our maintenance would all be done from right away. And so maybe if a pole needs to be replaced, and I will have to, I don't want to speak out of term on that one. So I'll have to follow up on how many times we do inspections. I think we inspect the lines once a year. And then if there is something that would need to happen, most of the work would just occur in the right of way.
And I guess my final piece, Meredith, what if, because this is like out of the easement or utility easement, I know right of way. And I know this hearing is not about Tonquin, I get it, but this is just such a great example of what will happen if it is approved. So my final question would be, if a conditional use permit had been required for the Tonquin project, how would that impact you? Would you still go through your public outreach as you already have, and then this would be in addition to, or would you really depend upon the county's land use process to meet the PGE's needs?
No, we would go through our own public involvement process. And I will say, I think this project has taught us some things, and we have a public website for Tonquin. So people can go there. There is an email if you have questions or things that need to go through that has been set up for a while. And we had already planned on doing our public houses before we knew that this was going to actually be a land use requirement. So, on these more impactful projects, we definitely recognize that public outreach is needed, that stakeholders need to be brought into the conversation, and that's important. It's an important piece that the community has a say.
It is. Thank you, Meredith. That really helps. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tammy. Meredith, I have a question. And what is the life expectancy of this system that you're putting in? And the reason I'm asking that is I've asked PGE in the past, what's our communities to look like 100 years from now? What are we doing now that we should be doing to make these communities more sustainable in the future? And I mean the future, 100 years from now. Is this the answer? Are we still going to have power lines overhead, or are we going to start putting stuff underground? I asked this at a Firewise local community meeting, and it took 6 weeks to get an answer from PGE, but they did come back with an answer about the Mount Hood corridor. So I'm kind of curious about this. If we will see change in the future, are these poles to get us through the next 100 years, or are they just to get us to another point to where we can start making change?
I am not an engineer and never pretend to be one. So
Don't have
the life expectancy, those are questions I will have to get back to you on. I've written that down though. And I mean, these current poles that are there now, the distribution poles were put in originally in the early 60s, some like even late 50s. There have been some pole upgrades along the way, particularly, but so we're in a new space and expanding our facilities, and we are definitely thinking about all of the things that you have mentioned and how do we plan for the future, but it's also a balance with the immediate needs, costs. So
thank you so much for coming tonight.
absolutely.
Any more questions, commissioners? Okay, we need to have a chat. Thank you, Dylan. Is there any discussion by the Planning Commission?
Do we have to close the hearing before we go into discussion? I know you closed it, but I think you reopened.
Oh, yeah, we probably
Okay.
should.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
of
Thank you.
course.
The public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed. Are there any further questions of staff from the Planning Commission?
I have a question.
Fire away.
So, during question and answer session, Jennifer and Joy, we came up with, we'll have to get back to you on that, and there's some thoughts on this and that. What, for the processing of this, do we wait? Can we wait for those answers, or do we need to make a recommendation today without getting, or that maybe the rest of the commission feels comfortable not getting those information before moving forward? I guess maybe more than Jennifer and Joy, maybe it's questions for the rest of the commission. Do you all feel like you've gotten all the information you needed to make a decision? Sorry for rambling there.
It's okay.
I mean, just from the county's perspective, you have time. So the board's hearing is not until June 12th.
Okay.
Which means if you want to set this over, you would be, you could leave the written, what I would do, because you want answers, is there's some alternative motions we've provided possibilities, and it would be, I think, to leave the record open, the written record until a week, and we can be specific, but there's a date and time we can provide a week before your next meeting, the next meeting that we would set it over for, so we could send you a complete packet of whatever else comes in. And then you would do deliberation decision only on May 13th. That's the date that's available. So there's no problem if that's what you choose to do.
Jennifer,
Yeah,
do you have a list?
Louise,
Sorry.
go ahead, Louise.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to that effect if this is a good time. I would move to leave the record open for written testimony until 4 p.m. on Monday, May 6th, 2024, and to continue ZDO 288 to 6:30 p.m. on Monday, May 13th, 2024, for deliberation and decision only. I was reading that from the
Mr. Peterson,
I would second that motion.
could we hear what Commissioner Peterson has to say too?
Oh, well, I guess I would want to know what the questions are before I vote on the motion. Yeah, there were a lot of them, but I think we ought to identify what are the questions that people feel they need answered in order to deliberate on this. Part of what I'm struggling with is we got off track a bit because of the project, and admittedly I started that. But the reality is, are the questions specific to the Tonquin project? Or are they specific to the ZDO? And if they're specific to the Tonquin project, then I don't see any point in delaying it, because that's really out of our control. So if there's some other questions that the commission feels they need to come up with a final decision on this, then that's fine. But I think we need to be clear on what it is we're questioning, because we're getting sucked in a little bit to deliberating on a project here that's not really what we're being asked to do.
Do we have a list of stuff that was promised to come in? Because I'm sorry, but I didn't make a list.
I could start with a couple of them. One of the things that Commissioner Wilson requested and was promised was criteria by which PGE would determine when undergrounding would be prohibited. So that would be one list.
Is that specific to the ZDO or is that specific to this project?
I think it's specific to the ZDO because it states in the current version that the undergrounding would not be required for, it refers to it. So I would say that it is to this project that we're looking at and not for the
So
Tonquin
are
project.
you proposing then that part of our recommendations would be, we would weigh in on when things need to be put underground or not?
That's correct. I would like to know what's the criteria they use to put something underground or to run it overhead. Now, I can understand the issue about the high voltage piece of it, but what else are they making a decision on? If they want to run a line into a house and they can't put it underground, why?
And this is about a conditional use permit. So it's not just power lines. We're talking sewer lines, we're talking water lines, we're talking communication lines, we're talking the utility that hangs on a pole that could be Wi-Fi or something of that nature. Am I correct?
Yes. I don't see any I don't see any overhead sewer lines. I don't see any overhead water lines.
And that's a very good point.
We don't like the idea of breaking overhead sewer lines. What might fall from gravity. So I would highly recommend we not do that. I understand what you're saying, Tom, and my question is not necessarily that we would put the criteria. I would propose that we wouldn't necessarily put the criteria in the ZDO or the code that we have, but that I feel like if we're not bought into those criteria, then the statement that we make in the regulation or our code needs to be modified. To what extent, I don't know. I think that's something that has come up multiple times throughout tonight's discussion that we ought to think about reviewing.
What else are we waiting for?
One of the things that I didn't ask but did note was from CPO representative and also from Lynn, the individual that provided feedback. They wanted for us to delay so that they could come back with some suggestions. So I don't know what those are, and whether if we were to, we're talking about Louise, did you say May 13th as a time certain, date certain? You know, whether that was sufficient enough time for the CPO to actually provide feedback on what their proposed language would be.
So it'd be May, Carrie, it'd be May 6th for
May
written
6th.
for them. And of course, they can also submit to the board up until at least June 12th, if
True.
not longer.
Yeah. So that was the other thing that I had. And I generally, for me, when I started looking at the changes that are being proposed tonight, generally, I was in favor of the changes, particularly because for the reasons that I mentioned, that because, you know, as a public utility manager, I need to be able to build stuff without having to get conditional approval permit every time we turn around. Having said that, I do think we came up with at least one of those items, above ground stormwater facilities. You know, how do we address that issue? And I'd like a little bit of time to think about it and maybe muse over some thoughts with Joy and others at the county. So that's another item that I was thinking that could use a little bit additional thoughts.
Something that comes to mind thinking about that too, along that line is there a difference between voltage that's going through these lines? You know, some lines can be buried, some can't. So these ones that can't be, should we ask for these to be identified? Do they need a conditional use permit? These transmission lines, are they similar to Bonneville Power Administration run that, you know, takes a 1/4 mile swath out of wherever it's going? I don't know. Input on that, anyone?
Well, and another thing you had brought up, Carrie, was Mr. Yamada had said, you know, to wait for additional comments from community planning organizations.
Right.
As you noted, the Hamlet of Beaver Creek, which acts as a CPO, did comment in our packet. If, you know, I'm feeling if we haven't received it by now, we're not going to. We had this quite some time ago, all the CPOs. So I would respect Mr. Yamada's request to wait for additional comment from CPOs, but I still think we're going to see any more. Would I hold a hearing over for that? No, but I respect these other things highly to hear what can or can't go underground, as well as the stormwater runoff. Joy, were you going to comment on what I was saying?
I have a question for Murph. For my benefit, is the voltage question just pertaining to what can go underground without the cooling requirement?
Yes,
or is it a voltage for would that be a requirement for a conditional use? Like,
Yeah,
which part of the code are you looking at?
I'm looking at, if we're going to change this, should we leave one part that is either over a certain voltage of power line to allow these transmission areas to go, you know, where they have to go? And so we can plan around those, if that makes sense. So anything under these certain voltages should go underground or have to go in front of a conditional use.
Well, if I remember what Miss Armstrong said, she said there were some other issues besides just the voltage. Now, I would like those clarified, exactly what those are. You know, to have the company say we can't put it underground with no criteria, that leads me to believe that it's not some subjective decision. I mean, they're going to make a subjective decision there, not an objective decision. What's going to benefit them and not what's going to benefit the community or the residents.
Was there anything else we were waiting for, Jennifer or Joy or anybody that?
Yeah, I thought Jennifer said she was gonna find something out or do something and come back, but I forgot what it was.
She might not be able to read her own handwriting with her eyes right now.
Exactly. Yeah. am significantly hindered here in my efforts. I've scribbled various things during this meeting, so I don't remember exactly, Louise, but we also have access to the recording. And so that's not a problem. We can review and provide you with like an updated memo that kind of addresses additional questions. We can comment a little bit on this comp plan policy question that we talked about. So we actually have a draft of something. I think that Joy or I can speak with PGE staff about what we think would be helpful, not about Tonquin, but about these sort of technical questions you're asking about undergrounding lines and what the implications are of that. And then I agree with Carrie about this stormwater stuff. We kind of already had that in the back of our mind, and that issue is something we should give some thought to as well. So beyond that, I don't know, but I can commit to listening to the discussion, and if we missed anything in this roundup, we'll find it. Joy knows what we missed.
One of the things I have noted is that we were going to look into the public input requirements for the PUC. And I feel like Meredith provided a lot of discussion about the outreach that is required for PUC and what they do above and beyond. So my question to the Planning Commission is that still something you would like us to follow up on, or are your questions answered regarding that?
Well,
I'd like the information. Oh, sorry. I'd like the information directly from the PUC, not through the intermediary.
Thank you.
I guess I raised my hand for that same.
Go ahead.
I was thinking along the same lines. Part of what was struggling with is I want to be careful that we don't get into a area where we're kind of stepping beyond our bounds. And I'm a little bit concerned about dictating underground versus above ground when there's a whole variety of other criteria that goes into that besides what we'd like to see, including the Public Utility Commission, who is charged with protecting the costs to the ratepayers. So I think it would be really helpful to understand, okay, are our concerns addressed through the public utility process? So a project like this wouldn't necessarily need a conditional use because there's another mechanism to make sure all those things are addressed. And I think that's what I'm looking for, because we could go forever trying to figure out, oh, well, should this be conditional use or should that be? And now we're back to the same dilemma that the county is, how do we decide? So I think what would be helpful is to understand, okay, what other mechanisms are in place to protect the public, as opposed to trying to use land use, try to protect everything through land use law or provisions. And so the PUC to me is a logical place to go. And based on what I heard tonight, it sounds like the PGE, they're doing their best, knowing this is going to be a controversial project. They're not going to have people happy about it. No one wants transmission lines in their backyard. I don't care who they are or where they are, for a variety of reasons. So they're in a tough spot. Either we want the power or we don't. So either we stop building data farms and doing all these things that require all this energy and transmission, or we accept the fact that some of the things that we expect in life come with trade-offs, and this is one of them. So to me, that's what I'm struggling with. So if we could get that clarified, I think that would help a lot. I'll get off my soapbox.
Oh, we can do that. We can do a little research. We can't become experts on the PUC, but we can get you some information.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think Tom's point that we are just the county. I mean, there are other levels that PGE has to jump through to do the project. So yeah, this is just one level.
Murph, I believe there's a motion on the floor.
There is a motion on the floor. And the motion was we move to leave the record open for written testimony until 4 p.m. Monday, May 2nd, 2024. And
May 6th, Murph.
May 6th, excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't know where I got the 22nd. Maybe there's a ball game that day, I don't know. Okay, May 6th, 2024 to continue ZDO 288 to 6:30 PM on Monday, May 13th for deliberation and decision only. So let's see, I'm going to leave this May 6th to continue. Monday, okay. I don't get that. Let's read it again. I move to leave the record open for written testimony until 4 PM on Monday, May 6, 2024, and continue ZDO 288 to 6:30 PM on Monday, May 13th for deliberation and decision only. Okay.
Perfect, perfect.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
Do we have a second? We
Oh,
have,
we
I
have a
second it.
Yeah, Michael did.
okay, Michael seconds. Okay. It has been moved by Commissioner Louise and second by Commissioner Michael that we, do I have to restate that?
No.
You already did.
Okay.
Just call for the vote.
Motion is open to further discussion at this time, and I call for the vote. Darcy, please calls for a vote.
Commissioner Lopes,
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson,
Okay, yeah.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes,
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Commissioner Pack,
Yes.
Commissioner Moss,
No.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes. Motion passes.
motion passes.
Public hearing is now closed. Jennifer, is there other business?
Only to give you a little update on recruitment. So we have 4 positions that are either just up for regular renewal, or of course we have had a vacancy since Commissioner Schroedel left the commission. So we opened the recruitment. We only received 3 applications for 4 spots. So we have extended the recruitment, and I think, Darcy, it closes this week, maybe?
It closed on Wednesday
Oh, okay.
and we now have 7 applications.
Oh, perfect. So we will move forward then with, normally the process is a couple of Board of County Commissioners and the chair of the Planning Commission normally do some interviews. And so I have to reach out to the board and figure out when that might happen and who's going to do it, and assuming they want to follow that process again this year. So technically the terms expire at the end of April, but existing members can continue to serve regardless until we reappoint, because it won't happen by the end of April, but I would think sometime in May is realistic that would happen. I do know that I believe at least 2 of our people re-upped again. And I believe Mr. Moss did not. So
No.
I was waiting for us to get to this point that I did inform Darcy and Jennifer that I would not be seeking reappointment, and I reached out to the board. So it has been a great 3 years, but my commitment when I started this was to serve 1 term and serve for the people in this area that are raising families and can't come to meetings. So now it's time, as I believe in the public service, for me to go and move on to something else and do that. So that was my rationale. So that was also my reason for voting no on moving the hearing until Jennifer said, we'll serve until you have the reappointment. So that was the reason for the no there.
yeah, if you're willing to continue to serve till we get somebody to replace you, that's great.
I will do.
Kevin,
yes.
it's
So I
been
was
great.
waiting until we had a meeting to inform the board.
Kevin, it's been
Even
great.
awesome. Yeah. Thank you. We'll miss you.
So Commissioner Peterson and Commissioner Wilson have both reapplied for their seats. And so we also have, of course, as I said, Stephen's spot. So So yeah, we'll keep you informed, but that is the only thing that I have under other business.
I have some other business. In our workshop, I made statements that were as if they were factual, and I have to apologize for this. Commissioner Peterson straightened me out. That the power lines in Florida and Texas are not all underground. I took somebody's word, like my wife, who lived in one city in Florida, and all of her power lines probably were, but she didn't see the rest of the state. My neighbor from Austin, he said the same thing. He said, oh, all the power lines are underground. Tom took a look, 33% of Texas power lines are underground. Florida has 45% with 90% on the way going underground.
Wow.
It's going to, because everything gets knocked down every time they have a hurricane. So put it underground. So it is possible, but it's not cheap. So what do they work with? I guess they're working with grants, probably brick grants, I would imagine, something to harden their communities. But I'm very sorry for speaking as if this was a factual number when I said everything was underground. It isn't. And if I ever do something like that, please correct me. You have an open door to do that.
And you got an open problem at home.
No, I don't. I straightened her out too.
Uh,
Why I'm out here on the front porch conducting this with a river.
I want to follow up on that comment because coincidentally, I'm working on the American Society of Engineers infrastructure report card. And although I'm not writing the chapter, energy chapter, there certainly are a lot of things in the energy chapter that I want to make sure the group addresses. And one of them is this wildfire issue and the fact that it's a kind of a double-edged sword. To totally mitigate the problem will cost billions of dollars, which will increase your rates. So without help from the federal government, i.e. the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment Act, for example, these things won't get addressed by the utilities because they just can't, it won't pencil out. So if you're really going to want to see significant change like that, and I suspect in Florida's case, the frequency of hurricanes can justify the expense and get national attention. That's kind of what needs to happen here if we're really serious about trying to address this whole risk with wildfires. It's going to really depend on help from the federal government. So that's my 2 cents.
Tom, how much do you think the lawsuits that Pacific Core and now PGE is probably going to be under will affect their decision-making in some of these preventative, because wildfire, we didn't used to have the kind of wildfire that we have had most recently. And I think the kind of dollars that they're paying out has got to be in their calculus when they're looking at, moving forward with the future risk mitigation. I can't believe that they would be subject to paying billion-dollar punitive damages and then continue to do the same kind of work that they're doing.
Well, what's going to happen is they'll just turn the power off in the future. So rather than risk the lawsuit, they'll risk the whatever lawsuit there might be for someone being inconvenienced by the power. If you don't know this already, but Pacific Power is owned by Warren Buffett,
right?
And he's all about bottom line. So he's not going to do it for the public good. He'll do whatever he has to do as long as there's a financial benefit to him.
Okay.
So that's what you're up against. So they'll just operate differently, is what they'll do. And so it's kind of back to what I'm saying. There's no incentive for public or utilities that are owned by people like Buffett and whatever to do things that benefit the safety of the community.
Yeah.
They're bottom line thinkers. primarily. So that's what you're up against.
Well, listen, I wouldn't mind my power getting turned off if my house didn't burn down.
I would agree, but some people don't. But there are other things that could have serious implications. Someone's on a life support at home, or there's other factors that we don't always think about. That well, there's consequences for that too. So there's, like I say, it's just constant balancing acts and trade-offs that we are facing with, in society.
But Tom, if you think about it, if your power goes out anyway because of the fire, rather than them turning it off and saving your house, to me, that's the trade-off right there.
There's no doubt. And in my area, there's no communication when the power goes out. We don't have Wi-Fi, we don't have cell phone, we don't have refrigerators. What we do have is a lot of smog from generators, because generators are very inefficient. And what we've just done is increase the ignition points by people that are out there filling generators while they're running or something of that nature. And we need to find a solution. I'm not sure what, and that's why I like to ask these questions, find out, PG has some very smart people. And if we can work together with them as a community, bring together as a community.
Hey, Murph, get a ham operator's license, then you'll have you have your communication. That's what I got.
I don't doubt it.
Yep. All right. Enough about wildfires.
Yes. I also have one other thing I want to bring up, and I want to ask Jennifer, and I want to see if the commission is into this. But when I signed up for this, I thought I'd be working the second and fourth week of each month. Is it possible that we could have workshops or something of that nature for fill-in, so we stay together as a commission and get to know more and more about the county? Is it possible to have some introduction to like the assessor's office and the planning department, maybe see what's behind those doors in planning and development?
And wetlands, and
yeah,
we've talked about educational opportunities.
Yes, and just maybe if it's just an hour and a half on those off days, but just to keep us together.
I mean, we can certainly talk about it. I think that, the issue is it's not that simple to just pull together a 1.5 hour workshop, right? It involves staff. And even if it's not a specific application, we're not experts on all those things, which means we either have to become experts or we have to reach out to people and get them, there's just logistics involved. So is it possible? Yes, but there's a question about whether we can devote the resources, which is not solely my decision. And I think the other question is, I'm all for education and whatnot, but essentially you're an advisory committee to the board. And so it becomes this question of how much of the education is involved with advising the board versus just having education to have education. And I think we kind of have to think about that a little bit. I do think some workshops will be coming up on some stuff that is likely to come to the commission over the next couple of years. And so that to me makes the most sense in terms of like housing. We've got some housing work we're going to have to do, a couple of kind of major projects based on some new and newish legislation that we're going to need to talk to you about. So we're also starting a grant funded project related to our zoning code that does include the consultant coming and talking to you. So there will be some things coming, and I'll need to ruminate a little more on this kind of educational piece. But I guess I'll be just fully candid. No, I don't think we're going to be able to do 2 meetings a month of, educational when there aren't items, but I think we could look to try to do more than we have been doing, because we are starting to be more staffed up. That's the good news. We've filled some positions, and if they stay, then we're going to have a little more bandwidth than we've had over the last few years.
I would really like to see something on code enforcement.
Okay. That's a possibility.
It's just something that I've been interested in, and it seems like we do have some issues with that keep coming up, not,
Yep.
from the public.
Okay. I can definitely look into that, Michael. Because the advantage there is that I don't have to be the expert on that, and I know where to find, the experts. So that one is pretty easy. I think we could do something with regards.
Well, I don't know if everybody else wants to hear anything about that, but to me,
To your point, I think that's a good example of something that's worth getting in front of us because it comes up periodically. But I also, having also worked for a public agency and know how much work goes into any kind of a public presentation, I fully appreciate what Jennifer's talking about. What may be an hour meeting for us could mean hours and hours and hours for staff just prepping for it. So I think we need to be sensitive to that as well, because whereas it would be great for us, is that the best use of the staff's time? So I'm kind of with Jennifer, but I think there are certain topics that make sense that are specifically related to some of our land use issues, like code enforcement, that I think, periodic briefing wouldn't be a bad thing. So something in between is what I would vote for, but make sure it's specific to what our charge is, not just to educate us on other topics.
Yeah, what I was looking for is, how does this code enforcement work? Somebody complains about something, what happens? How does that? I'm not looking for specific code violations, but how does that process work? And that should be, fairly simple to come up with. Somebody gets a complaint, here's how we do it, here's what the results are, and here, how does appeals work?
Yep. Yeah, no, I think we can, I can definitely ask the code enforcement supervisor about this. And yes, I think we can probably find a time to have somebody come, because I know that they've done those kinds of presentations for other groups. I'm guessing that Tammy's probably heard one at some point at the Hamlet of Beaver Creek.
Lots of them. Oh yeah. Yeah, I could actually give you the spiel if you wanted it, but
Tammy could just give the presentation, but no, I think we can definitely do that. And the other thing, the State Department of Land Conservation and Development has really gotten very involved in housing, because of course that's been the hot topic here the last few years. And so they've really staffed up in that area, and they've offered, to come and talk to, and not just to us, but like generally to all the jurisdictions, if you're planning commissioner or your board or whatever. So I think we can get a speaker probably from there too, which would dovetail with some work that we expect to be doing over the next few years. So those are a couple of things I think we could pull together. Not in the next month or 6 weeks, Murph, but I think we can do it.
Well,
thank you.
I just wanted to echo Tom's sentiment, and I want to also thank Jennifer for having the fortitude to say no to us, because I have worked for managers who basically say, sure, we can do it, and then it's up to the staff to figure out how to fit it all in. So I really appreciate your thought. I just have one quick reminder. It probably only pertains to me because none of you are as of a procrastinator as I am, but if you haven't filed your paperwork with the state, whomever gets it, ethics or somebody, we have to submit something about how we didn't, we're staying above board. That is due, I think, on Sundays or Monday coming week. So
I think it's due on tax day, April 15th.
Yeah, so I'm waiting to write my check to IRS, so I'm also waiting to do that. But no, I'm sure everybody's already done it, but I haven't done it yet. So
it's pretty easy. It's all done online.
They made it a lot easier. Yeah,
very simple.
Unless you click the wrong button and then you get to reload your data. That was super fun.
Nice.
But another real quick before we launch, I think it's the next round is April 22nd. That's what it says here is just minor and time sensitive amendments, but I'm absolutely assuming it's also the housing options, right? Okay.
It is.
I think we, like this one, should be very proactive and prepare, because I think it's going to be well attended and a lot of testimony.
Yeah. No, I have to say I was surprised tonight, and we still do have some members of the audience, so I want to thank them for coming tonight. I really did expect that we were going to have a lot more testimony tonight than we ended up with, and I definitely want to thank Dylan for being here, because I just really didn't know. And so I guess, you know, I think we're going to handle this on our own in 2 weeks, but we'll do fine. And yes, I expect there's going to be quite a bit of interest, and Martha and I were careful in the materials that went out, because this is the typical, you know, we do this every year or every other year, this minor and time sensitive. And so we were careful in the notice to say, hey, there's more going on here than just, this is really more about time sensitivity than it is about minor. I mean, a couple of the housing amendments are big. And this, you know, you've had a workshop on it. You had a workshop on it in February, but this is both the accessory dwelling units in rural areas and the potential for occupying an RV, essentially as a quote permanent dwelling, in urban and rural residential areas. And so I think that there will be probably quite a bit of interest, and so you'll be getting a packet from Martha and Darcy in a week. And then we'll be back here on the 22nd to do a public hearing. That's ZDO 285, I believe is the number.
Will that include the survey results, Jennifer?
Yes. Yes, Martha.
Thank you.
Yeah, Martha will do an assessment of what the outreach. She had a town, like an online town hall kind of thing as well. And so, yeah, yep. And that was the only thing on your schedule. But now, of course, you'll have the continuance of this item from tonight on May 13th. And then May 27th is Memorial Day, so there'll be no meeting on the 27th. And we will just see what the summer holds.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I was really surprised at the lengthy segment they did on the TV news about the upcoming accessory dwelling unit and RV issue. Usually I don't see much about, you know, our topics on the TV news, and they did a big segment. And so I thought, boy, that got the public's attention if they didn't already know. So I think that will even create more excitement and testimony even than, you know, the potential was for this one.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I hope so. I hope we hear from some folks on these issues, because they're important.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just giving you heads up, I unfortunately have a conflict with the next meeting, so I'm going to miss all those fun and games.
Okay. So to the rest of you, if please let us know as soon as possible if you cannot be here for the 22nd, because we need 5 in order to hold a hearing. And there's only 8 of you to begin with the open seat. So, all righty.
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You heal. Hope your eyes heal.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And you sleep well tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Both of you, such an awesome job.
Yep. Good job, Joy. Good job, Jennifer. Yep.
Do we have to officially adjourn?
We already officially adjourned.
I think the chair can just announce it. Good night, everybody.
See everyone.
Good
night.
Go and
Good
take
night.